Cool. Well, I want to come back to sort of actual coverage and substance in a minute, but I thought it'd be interesting for all the journalists listening in just to hear about a little bit about our four different organizations' approach to climate coverage, where our role is in that, how kind of the market of climate journalism is changing, or how our individual organizations, and I know we've all had different kinds of investments in climate, interact with that between Bloomberg, the Post, AP, and Pulitzer Center. Anyone can start, but just talk about a little bit like how your organization is tackling climate right now in the broader climate journalism world.
I could go if you'd like. And obviously at the Post, we have done a major expansion in the last year and a half. And, again, it's been really amazing having worked in the space and initially been kind of a very small band to see how we've tried to build on some of the areas that we've traditionally done, including covering climate and environmental policy and doing big projects, to really say what's the full breadth of coverage that meets this moment in a decisive decade. And so that's included really we're expanding what we do in terms of weather, and specifically extreme weather, covering climate science and impact, doing visual storytelling, whether that's through data visualization and graphics, through illustrations, photography, video, and other forms. And then also doing more consumer-oriented and more accessible coverage of climate, which includes climate solutions, as Peter had mentioned, but also trying to engage people by writing about these things and covering these things in a way that's a little less of the traditional journalistic approach, speaking from on high, but really engaging more like a friend and sharing things, especially when they're both actionable through columns like our climate coach column, or also just expose things like the wonders of the world. And we think then like of nature and animals and things like that, and pairing that with kind of this practical advice is one of the ways to really meet our audience in all the different places where they are.
Okay, I'll go. Somebody else could go too, but I want to push it. We have also at AP had a really big expansion of our climate efforts. About 2 years ago, there were 4 people, I'll say, who covered climate change at the AP. Today, there are 26 full-time around the world. Before the breakout of our team, climate was covered under health and science. It was part of that department, and they did a good job. I mean, they covered what needed to be covered, but it was very much from that lens. Whereas now we're our own department, climate and environment, and we really try to cover climate to the extent that we can in a very holistic way, looking at impact, looking at policy. Doing slice of life things off the news, interesting people, always like people focused. And I would say, like, in general, we're a really central part of AP's report today, whereas we were not even a year ago. And I think part of that is because the story is evolving and there's more extreme weather and people are noticing it. But it's also, I think, because of the conversations that we have within AP and some of the internal training that we do, and making people feel like climate should be part of everybody's beat.
Yeah, I think similarly, we've been supporting journalists and newsrooms to cover climate really since nearly our inception, many years ago. But over the past few years, we've really stepped it up into a number of kind of larger kind of categories. So we've got, you think about sort of the front lines of climate change. We've got a rainforest journalism and rainforest investigative network that are really focused on working with, investigative journalists around the world to highlight the damage being done to the rainforests and how journalism can help kind of, show everyone, the dangers involved here and how it, who should be held accountable. But we've had kind of our Connected Coastlines U.S. initiative that's been supporting newsrooms all around the U.S., telling stories about coastal climate change and more broadly, and over the past 2 years, we've been looking at into climate and work issues, climate and workers, and that's an area that really affects so many people in the kind of developing world, but now here in the U.S. as well, and we're seeing that as a really important beat. What are companies doing to address issues, around worker safety and issue, but also how are companies transitioning and making, changing the future potentially for themselves and for workers to make it, more sustainable and adapting to the changes necessary to deal with the climate future. And then, I'd say we're doing a lot of work too with student journalists, helping them get involved, younger reporters, getting them involved in covering climate issues. That is super important to develop, a stable of young journalists who will be keeping, focused on this topic and reporting on it in their various countries and states here in the U.S. But for us, it's a lot of these issues are so interconnected. So and it's the newsrooms and journalists that bring it to us, and we're in all these bigger issues like health and science. Oh, I forgot to mention science misinformation too. That is a big part of this issue. So we've funded a number of projects looking into climate misinformation, how it's spread, why it's spreading, and it's, by the way, growing, which is alarming.
Everyone here was able to speak with such authority about how their newsrooms cover climate, and I'm going to just own it. I've only been with Bloomberg for 6 months, and Bloomberg is huge and very confusing. And so I can tell you a little bit about how Bloomberg works, but I'm still figuring it out. And everyone who has been at Bloomberg a really long time says this is normal. So I feel okay with this, but I just want to throw that out there. And so I sit on Greener Living, which is sort of a subset of the broader Green Desk. And so in addition to kind of traditional climate reporting, we do stories that touch it sort of like lifestyle, like greener lifestyles. At the same time, so then we're sort of subsumed within this larger umbrella of green that does even more of the kind of traditional climate reporting. But Bloomberg's kind of bread and butter is, it's a newsroom that's housed within a large financial organization. And there are reporters who have very specific beats. Like you might have not just an aviation reporter, but a reporter who does Delta. That's all I do. And so so often the expectation is that there's just really large cross collaboration, both within different teams within Bloomberg and also within there are Bloomberg reporters all over the world. So often with reporters that are located in different countries. So I've worked in newsrooms before where sort of the expectation was that you as a climate reporter, if you wanted to do a story in India, they would fly you to India. Bloomberg doesn't really do that because we generally will have reporters in India. And so the expectation is there needs to be a reason to fly, you have to fly to India as opposed to you collaborating with the reporter in India. Which honestly I think is great. It's great both from a reporting perspective, I think, and also it's great from a climate footprint perspective. So we're not flying people around needlessly. But I'm still figuring out how to navigate all of that. It's very large.